Made it again.
Oh, good.
So
Now
let's
it starts
continue,
again.
but we will see later. Yeah.
Okay, great. Supposing we're not just interested in levels, but in particular discrete types of states. So we're not interested in pain, we're not interested in anxiety, we're only interested in nausea. What would we do? We'd look for indicators that change only in humans self-reporting nausea. We'd look for indicators that change not in animals avoiding all stimuli, but animals avoiding particular types of food. We'd look for indicators that change not in response to all threats to fitness, but in response to toxins or gastric infections that harm fitness. We'd look for indicators that change not just in response to affect-improving drugs, but specifically drugs that tackle nausea, or perhaps drugs like lithium chloride that induce nausea. And again, if we have ready-made, ready validated indicators of nausea, we can use those to validate new ones. So I really hope that makes sense. If there's time at the end, I'll talk about what people sometimes do instead if they're not choosing indicators based on their construct validity. So what I want to do next for the last 10 minutes or so is talk about some other properties that a good indicator should have, as well as basic construct validation. And we need to understand these properties if we're really to use it in a legitimate, defensible way. So here I'm going to be talking about thinking about indicators' responsiveness, how readily they track even tiny changes in affective state, or their selectivity, which basically means their specificity to the states we're interested in. So every single indicator is going to have at least some issues with responsiveness, where it fails to track changes in responsiveness that really are there. So we need to think about this whenever we have an indicator. Where is it going to fail to have the responsiveness we might need? Where is it going to act like this rickety old scale instead of a finely calibrated, super expensive laboratory balance? And if we understand this, where an indicator is not going to respond, we won't make false null or type 1 errors. And if we don't understand it, we're going to make these kind of errors. We're going to miss changes in affect that are actually present. And potential indicators with responsiveness typically arise when an indicator only shows small effect sizes, or it's very noisy in its assessment, perhaps where an indicator has threshold effects, so it only changes when an animal's above a certain threshold, or where there are floor or ceiling effects in an indicator. And I'll give examples in a couple of slides. This isn't the only type of problem we need to think about and anticipate. Every single indicator is going to have issues with selectivity. And here we need to think about, is the indicator only tracking emotions or moods in the way that we think and want them to, or are they sometimes triggered by things we're not interested in? So for example, if we were using smiling to infer positive affect in humans, we need to recognize that genuine smiles probably do the job, but fake smiles, like this guy here, desperately faking a grin, but you can see it's not reaching his eyes. Here, if we took this as a sign of positive affect, this would be a false lead. It'd be a kind of false positive. We'd be inferring positive states that aren't really there. This guy looks really like he's just desperately awkward. So problems with selectivity can arise. Cedric, can I answer that at the end? Just because I'm a little bit worried about timing, but ask the question at the end. So potential issues with selectivity arise when indicators respond to arousal rather than the director of valence, something like heart rate, when signals have complex functions that aren't just there to indicate emotions, where indicators change due to factors like age or sex or seasonal effects, and also where indicators are affected by our very measurement method. So to illustrate what I mean and how thinking this way a priori before we use our indicators can be really useful, I want to first show you a couple of affect indicators that would be really perfect for making finely graded assessments of the relative differences in animals' affective states. So if we were developing a refined research procedure, for example, or a really great analgesic, we would love indicators that behave like this. Perfect indicator A just steadily increases the more and more positive an animal state is. Perfect indicator B steadily declines the more and more positive an animal state is. Every single data point falls on both of these lines. It's perfectly responsive, these indicators, and they're perfectly selective. Well, dream on, there is no such indicator, but that's okay. So I want to talk about a good emotion indicator in humans, how it's imperfect, and how those imperfections don't matter as long as we can anticipate them in advance. So on this plot, I have affective state, the thing we're interested in, on the x-axis, our indicator on the y-axis, and I should have mentioned that these plots are inspired by dose-response curves and calibration curves. The thing we're interested in is on the x. The thing we're using to make the inference about the x is on the y. And this scale is a cardinal scale. Okay, so you can imagine that human mouth curvature goes down when we're miserable and it goes up when we're happy. And we use smiling as a sign of positive emotion all the time, and we use readiness to smile as a sign of positive mood all the time, even though this indicator is prone to imperfections. And that's okay because we understand those imperfections. So let's look at what these imperfections are. So one type of imperfection is there's only so far your mouth can curve up or down. No matter how ecstatic you are, your mouth isn't going to curve more than about this. So there are ceiling effects, at which point the indicator ceases to be responsive. And there are also floor effects if you're really, really miserable, beyond which the indicator cannot convey increasing levels of misery. So floor or ceiling effects are causes of low responsiveness, but easy to anticipate and understand. Smiling is a signal, and typically we don't really smile unless there are people to smile to. We may slightly faintly smile if we're on our own, but you typically don't show big grins by yourself unless there's something really strange about you. So if you're by yourself, you could be really, really happy and not smiling, and that would be a false null. You're really, really happy, but you're not smiling because there's no audience. So typically with signals, they're prone to false nulls if there isn't an audience around to induce the production of the signal in the subject. So those are two classic kind of places where smiling is not always responsive. It can also mislead us and lead us in the wrong direction by being prone to false leads. So I already talked a bit about fake smiling. I'm sure you've all seen fake smiles in awkward or nervous people. You may well have produced fake smiles yourself when you're nervous or feeling awkward. They're kind of obvious, but if we're only looking at mouth curvature, we would be misled and we would think a very tense person is happy when they're not. And finally, now I don't know that much about babies, but apparently they can look like they're smiling when they just have slight wind. They can also look like they're smiling if they lack forebrains and are probably not sentient due to terrible things like Zika virus. So smiling can also generate false positives or misleading results in organisms who aren't feeling positive, but are just producing a smiling kind of reflex. So these are the ways in which mouth curvature can let us down as an indicator, but if we understand that in advance, it can still be a brilliant way to infer affective states in our fellow humans. And this kind of framework is one I've personally found really useful, and one which the authors in the book have found useful, and which they've presented for every single indicator or family of indicators that they discuss in their chapters. So I really hope this way of thinking you find inspiring. You know, we just need to recognize that there's no perfect affect indicators out there. There's just a series of tools which are better or worse for some jobs than others. And in saying these things, I'm really sort of catching up with something that Marion Dawkins said, getting on for 30 years ago now, that when you're using welfare indicators, you need to understand their pros and cons. And this is like being aware of the limitations of your materials before you start building a house. I always thought this was a lovely phrase. And more recently, she said very astutely, the problem we face in welfare assessment is not that there aren't enough welfare indicators or we still don't have ones that are good enough. We have many that are great. We just need to make clearer sense of the ones that we have available. And this has really been our mission in the book, and I hope helps you thinking about the welfare indicators that you work with. Okay, so to briefly wrap up, I would say the key messages today are that we can be objective about the subjective. We can use measurable proxies to say legitimate, defensible things about private subjective states. And we often do this. There are many examples of excellent best practice out there. But doing so needs care and thought. And sometimes that step is missed, and it really shouldn't be. So proper construct validation, sorry, is required because affective states are these private subjective constructs. Proper construct validation is also crucial in our research worlds because without it, we really risk making mistakes that could accidentally harm animals, that could accidentally harm our colleagues by sending them down the wrong path, and could accidentally harm animal users and producers by telling them that things are bad when they're not. Construct validation is also very, very doable. There are 5 well-accepted complementary methods that are all in use already and that are all pretty well understood. So we can do this, and we do. But even when we have valid indicators, none is perfect. They're never going to be, but that's 100% okay if we just get better at formally recognizing the weaknesses of each one a priori, where each one fails to be responsive, where each one fails to be selective. We can then pick the right tools for a given job and use them in a way that's going to be more correct and accurate. All right, so I want to end with some acknowledgements. I want to thank Anna Olsen and Rohish Kaur for inviting me and hosting the meeting. I want to thank the around 100 graduate students I practiced on through giving this course over a decade or so. I want to thank Charlotte Byrne and Cassandra Tucker for some great discussions on this topic. I want to thank too the authors of this book who didn't just contribute great chapters, but also contributed their thoughts and their criticisms and their ideas and made the book so much better than Mike and I could have produced by ourselves. Then, of course, a massive thanks to Mike Mendel, who's been a kind of companion in crime and collaborator for a very long time on this topic, and Berta Nielsen, who's done a fantastic job making this whole exercise actually happen. So it's 5 minutes to 11. I'm happy to answer any questions. I also have a list of how indicators are chosen sometimes if we're not using construct validity, what kind of dodgy shortcuts we use instead. So if anyone wants to see that, let me know as well. But let me open to questions first.